Hello, Angel. How you doing? All right. Let me put OBS up so I can see that. I think everybody can hear me just fine. Let me grab these things I downloaded. If anybody else is on the live stream, go ahead and say hi. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Compositing. What does compositing mean? Combining images. How we do this? Well, we need to think about the actual values of the pixels in the image, and we need to ultimately combine things here, with a background and some other foreground elements. And so the alpha channel that we discussed previously, that allows us to combine things together in a PNG and cleanly cut things out, is also going to be important here. But first, let's just make something. I'll hand off all these images to you guys, but I'm just going to make a new HD composition, and we're going to call this color values. 5 seconds is fine. And I'm going to take all of my media and dump it into a folder here. I'll just call it stills. There we go, just to stay organized. There we go. And I'll grab this one. And we'll go ahead and scale it down into the image there. And I'm going to go back to full resolution. So this looks nice and crisp and clean. Cool. Great. So just to review, every image that we bring in here is going to have either 3 channels, meaning that there is RGB, or 4 channels. In that case, we would have R, G, B, and then A for alpha channel. The alpha channel allows us to have a transparency value for that color. Over here, I'm in Window, Workspace, and I'm going to go Window, Workspace, Standard. There we go. And part of After Effects that we may not have looked at here yet, I'm moving the mouse around. Allow me to draw your attention to the upper right hand corner of the screen, where we have some information about the pixel that the mouse is over. And so this is important information. On the right, we have the X and the Y coordinates. And let's just quickly say something about that. Up until now, we've been animating in a very specific way, but allow me to just expressly say this here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new ellipse for the purpose of demonstrating something. And something when you make a new shape, which is super handy, is we know how this little reticle right here, this is where the anchor point is, and often we want the anchor point to be in the middle, right? And so you could grab the anchor point tool and move it over there. And that's not very precise. Another way to do this is to, it's a really great shortcut to write down on my list of shortcuts, and that's Control-click the anchor point tool. This will center the anchor point. So watch this. Keep your eye on the anchor point right there. And I am going to hold down Control and double click here. Boom. Moves this right to the middle of the layer, right? And this is a shape on a separate layer, so it's right there. Good. Now, I made a new HD composition, and as we all have memorized so far, HD is how many pixels across? 1920. And then how many pixels is it up and down? 1080. Very good. Now, I'm going to grab the circle here. Let's go ahead and just call this white circle. And I'm going to hit P for position. And let's just say something about the position in After Effects. I'm going to grab the position here and change it to 0, tab 0. And look at where the circle is. This is the upper left-hand corner of the screen. This is 0, 0. Okay. It's important to make note of that because, coming from math class, where we have the Cartesian plane, you have your y and your x, and this is the origin there, and we kind of think of this as being the area, and we would think that 0, 0 would be the lower left-hand corner. It's not. Why is it not? Because After Effects is about compositing, and when you're compositing images together, usually having the anchor point in the upper left-hand corner makes more sense. It's more of a historical decision. I'm not sure they do it the same way now, but it's how the program works, okay? And so that's 0, 0. If I were to place the circle over here, this is the entire way across the screen, and so the y will not change, right, because it's not going to move up and down. It's just that the x will change. And so what will the x value be over here in this corner? It is going to be 1920, 0. Okay? So if I change this value down here, I'll type in 1920. Now the circle has moved over to this corner of the screen. This is 1920, 0. Now, for the confusing part. The part that's counterintuitive, as you move down the screen, y increases. Okay, so it's the opposite of what you might think. Right? So as we move down the screen, y increases. So up here, y equals 0. Down here, y is going to equal, if we move it the whole way down the screen, exactly. And so this coordinate over here in this corner, we're still all the way over to the right, and that was 1920. And now we're the whole way down, and that is 1080. And so if I type in 1920 tab 1080, enter, that moves the circle down to the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And then this corner over here, x is going to equal 0, but y will still be equal to 1080. Okay? And so 0 tab 1080 moves us over there. And so what I would write down in my notes to just solidify this knowledge is up here we have 0, 0. Over here we have 1920, 0. Over here we have 1920, 1080, and then over here we have 0, 1080. Okay, so that's how the coordinate system works in After Effects. So what does this give us? It may be confusing that y increases as we move down, but that's certainly better than y being 0 and all of the y coordinates on the screen being negative. That would be, more cumbersome because we have our origin in the upper left hand corner. Okay, so now these numbers depend on the size of your comp, right? Essentially, the x would be the max and y would be the min. Over here, it's max, max, and then over here, it is min, max, and then over here, it is min, min, right, for minimum. So if my composition were 500 by 500, it would be 0, 0 over here. It would be 500, 0 here, 500, 500 here, and 0, 500 over here. Okay, so important to realize that if I think about it in terms of math class, if you were great at the Cartesian plane, the After Effects space is like this quadrant on the Cartesian plane, but it has been flipped over so that 0, 0 is here, but then all of the numbers are positive. So, yeah, so that's better. We can explicitly understand what's going on, and so that's what this number over here represents. As I mouse around, this is giving me the exact coordinate of the location of the mouse, and it is in that format. Now, we're going to stick to using 1920 by 1080, so that's our max will always be 1920. Now, max means the maximum value on the screen. We can still place things off screen, and they can have coordinates that are beyond those values, but that just means like it's off screen, right? It's off the stage. Depending on how big the object is, some part of it may still be visible, but the space on stage is limited to 1920 by 1080 in that direction. Cool. All right, that makes sense. Now, let's talk about the other values over here. These are the values for the color values for that individual pixel, right? And so this is going to be on a 0 to 255 scale. This has to do with the bit depth of the pixel. Essentially, how many numbers that we're using to represent the color. So there are some options here. While we're working, Let me say it this way. Let's say this. Okay, so let's do this. Up here, by default, you should be seeing this on a 0 to 255 scale. Okay, so 0 would be, the minimum for the given channel, and 255 would be the max. Why that range? That seems like a weird set of numbers. This is the maximum amount of range that you can store given an 8-bit number. Okay, so this has to do with binary math, and that's really what the computer understands at the end of the day. And so this is the amount of resolution that's there. The short story here is that as we have more bits, it can equal more colors, more gradations in color, right? So if you've followed video games, right, we've gone, as technology has increased, we've been able to essentially have more bits, and so you have, this is the historical example of it, 8-bit video games. That's essentially Nintendo Entertainment System, the very original one. Then you have 16-bit, which was like Sega Genesis, and then eventually you had 32-bit calculations, things that have come afterwards. Every time you drastically increase the number of colors and the fidelity of everything that you can do. And so we can run After Effects in different modes here that have different amounts of fidelity. Up under File, Project Settings, Color, and here we have the what's referred to as the bit depth. And by default, we're in 16 or 8 bits per channel, and you can see you can change it to 30 bits, 16 or 32, and we'll change it to 16 for right now. And I'll say OK. And now, check it out when I look at the numbers. Now the range for each pixel would be 0 to 32,768. Way more gradations possible for the number of colors, right? How many colors could I represent now? You could calculate the total number of colors by multiplying the max by the max by the max. So it would be 3278 times 3278 times 3278. Millions of colors. You also may have noticed this over here in the effects and presets, in that this does come into play here, where the way that the math is done in different effects, it's done at different levels. And so you may or may not have noticed this. As I look at a bunch of effects here for After Effects, you see that some of them are going to be calculated in 16-bit, and other ones will be calculated in 32-bit. We're just going to stay in 16 here, but the overwhelming point here is that you have footage or images that may be coming in at different bit depths, and this number over here, unless you specifically know what bit depth you're in, it could be hard to tell what is the max or what is the min. Okay? What I'm talking about only goes for the color over here, right? It has nothing to do with the coordinate information. Coordinate information remains the same. That's just describing a point in space. So, in the info panel here, let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. Up here, if we right-click on Info, there's a couple options, and by default we're in Auto, and we see, cool, oh, here's the different values, right? So 255, 32, 768, and then this would be the 32-bit, which is actually a decimal number. We don't need to get into it. The point here is we're going to switch it to this one, %, right? Because then no matter what bit depth we're actually at, it'll be a more recognizable number. So we'll come in here, right click, %, And now, as I mouse over, we have a much more understandable amount of how bright is this pixel in each channel, right? It's at 50% red, 50% green, 50% blue. Okay, so again, that's right-clicking on info and switching from auto color display to percent. So that now, regardless of what's going on with the bit depth, we have a number up there which is not going to be shifting and requiring our sort of interpretation. Cool. Okay, that's good. And so now we can start to look at what one of the first things we need to look at here when we're compositing is how white is white and how black is black, right? And so when we're in percentages, the whitest part, the whitest possible display is going to be 100%, right? The brightest white would be 100% red, 100% green, 100% blue, right? The blackest black would be 0, 0, 0. Everybody, that's pretty clear. However, that's not the case for most images. The white part of the image is not going to be completely pinned up to totally white, and the dark part of the image is not going to be pinned down to totally black. And so, in this case, for instance, if I look at, what's the dark part of this particular image? This part right here. And so if we look at that, right there, and I look at the values over here, right? It's at like 2, 8, 10, right? As far as like where that is, how dark that part is, and where's the brightest part. Maybe like over here, and that's somewhere around 90, 91, 91, right? And so we see that that's how bright the whitest part is for that image and how bright the darkest part. Notice that these images here, the background images I've provided, one, you'll be able to identify as those because they are, I believe, all JPEGs, right? Because they're the ones we're going to use as backgrounds. We don't need to see anything behind them. We're essentially going to put things in front, right? So those are JPEGs. The other ones that we're going to use to composite in front are PNGs because we want to have some sort of way to composite them, right? And so that's, for instance, where we're at with that image. Let's look at some other one. Here, I'll drag this forest one over, scale this down a bit, maybe move it up. Cool. And so now, where is the darkest part of the image now? Down here. And if we look at this value, this is a different black value. It's about 10, 8, 8 over there. And then if we look at the brightest part, maybe over here in this image, that is about, it's pretty white. This one's been kind of normalized, 99, 99, 98 there. Very bright. So we get a different setup there. And then once again, remember, we can look at each channel by itself with this tool, or this sort of view down here, right? If I turn this on, if I go to red, it can be counterintuitive at first, right? You're like, I selected red, why is the image black and white? Because this is what is this showing me? It's showing me the brightness of red here. Why do they do it showing white instead of red? Because, like we discussed earlier, our eyes are not equally sensitive to all color channels, all colors, right? And our eyes are much more sensitive to brightness than they are to color, right? You've experienced this at night. You go out at night and you can see things, but often the color of them gets kind of obscured, right? We're able to differentiate these differences in brightnesses, but not necessarily totally make out what the color of the object is. Which is why they use white here, because we're much more sensitive to it. We can more clearly see the differences. And so this is the brightness of the red, this is the brightness of the green, and this is the brightness of the blue, right? So we can see how those are different. And then there is no transparency in this. And so if I were to look at the alpha channel, right, it's just white. There is nothing that's see-through in this image, given its current state, right? Now that we have some experience drawing masks, for instance, if I were to come in here and draw a mask on this of any kind, it may make a little more sense now. I'm going to actually invert it. There we go. It may make a little more sense now that when I go to look at, you know, red, okay, green, makes sense. If I go to alpha, now I get that, right? That's what drawing a mask is actually doing. It's, you know, saying that now you've created some variation in the alpha channel, and now we have a totally see-through part here, right? And if I were to turn on one of the other images below it, we would see something, you know, like that, right? I've essentially created a hole in the trees, which is on top of the other one, which is that building in the distance there. Does that make sense? Cool. And like I said, that's creating a mask. It's a similar effect when you create a track mat. The difference is that a track mat can be a separate layer, right? And so if I come in and make a shape of some kind, right, I don't have anything selected, and so it's just making a shape, right? And I select it as the alpha mat for this layer, right? Now, same thing, right? The alpha mat has changed the alpha channel values, and so now we have that, right? This part is totally opaque, and this part is totally transparent. And so this allows us to see all this stuff here. Let's get rid of that. So changing this percentage up here allows us to more accurately see what's happening, or just more easily see what's happening, I would say, with the different color values. And let's look at another way to inspect this. And we have some options here, but for this top one, I'm going to select this and go to levels, and with this one selected, double click on levels, and this is a chart of the values for all of the pixels sort of mapped in a linear fashion across the image, okay, from left to right. As the name indicates, this type of graph is called a histogram, okay? And essentially we have input up here, and then we have output down here. Let's talk about the input first. And so like I said, the darkest part of this image is not completely 100% black. And we can see that in the histogram, right? 100% black is here on the graph, right? That's 0, 0, 0. 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue. And the darkest parts of this image, you know, as we saw, were just slightly above that, whatever it was, 9%, 8%, 9%. And you can see that, you know, the blue channel is darker than the green channel, which is slightly darker than the red channel. You can look at the histogram one channel at a time by selecting it up here. By default, it shows you all 3 channels simultaneously, but you can switch just show me the red, right, and it forwards the red to the front. Just show me the green, and it brings the green to the front. And just show me the blue, and there it brings the blue to the front. And there's all 3 of them together. The different handles here allow us to start to shift the information that's in these channels. And so I noticed I switched the levels back to RGB. And so if I start to grab this one over here, which is the input at the very top of the system, you know, there are some very bright parts of the image. We noticed that before, right? When I said, like, okay, where's the brightest part of this image? I went over here to this part where the trees are, and that was super bright. I mean, it was like up around 99, 99, 99, which is confirmed by our graph, right? This is all part of that very bright spot up there. And so if I grab this handle here and start moving it to the left, watch what happens to the image. It's getting brighter and brighter. Because what are we doing? We are shifting more of the values up. We're essentially taking things that used to be at, you know, maybe 50% here, and now they are at the top of the input, meaning that they are now up at, you know, pretty much 100%. If we do the opposite here and grab this one and start to bring this up, we're doing the opposite, where now things that are at the bottom, more and more of it is getting, you know, smushed down to the very bottom of the spectrum as black, right? So grabbing this one is brightening, and grabbing this one is darkening. I think it's useful to, it's a nice trick here. There's a couple different ways to do this, but one here is to create another levels. So I got 2 levels here. And so this is pretty nifty in that now I can sort of watch what happens in the second histogram when I adjust the first histogram. And so if I were to do this, you see that more and more of it is becoming white. And watch what happened here at the very end. We see it spike like this, and then, you know, the spike maxes at some point, but all of this range here starts to decrease, right? It all gets darker, all gets less in value, which means it's brightening. So if I do this, the opposite happens if I grab this one and start moving it this way. You see that things, first of all, there was no part of the image as it was unedited that was deep black, 100% black. 100% black meaning 0, 0, 0. But if I start to crush the black here, it really starts shoving all of those values down to the bottom end of this, until if I move it the whole way, essentially everything gets crushed down into total darkness. This is a interesting way to see this visually. Another, I think, higher fidelity way to do it is come up to Window, lumetri scopes. So Window, lumetri scopes. This opens up our scope here, which is a more high fidelity way of looking at what's going on. And so here, what's going on here, we get the brightness going across the image charted here, but each one is represented by the correct color. And so that we can see, like, what is the brightest channel in this? The red, right? The red is at the top here. And then what is the darkest? The blue, right, is down there. And so now it's interesting to see what happens here. As I smush this down, it's getting brighter and brighter. You see all of the energy is being shifted up to the top of the graph to the point where, you know, just all gets slammed right up there at 100%, 255, to the point where it all becomes white. If I do it the other way, as you may have guessed, it smushes all of this down so that there's some of it that's completely dark, and then all of the energy generally comes out of that. And so again, this shows up under Window, Lumetri Scopes. We'll leave it there. Great. That's good. Now, the middle here. The middle is our gamma. And watch what happens if we move this different directions. We move it to the right, and it is darkening, but it's not quite like smushing it when you drag from the far left. We are essentially sort of curving the output. And so you see that the bright parts stay brighter for what is actually to the right of that gamma. And if we start to drag it the other way, we see what's happening with each one. Now, again, that middle, right? So these names are the different arrows that are right here. This is input black, input white. This is the gamma. This is output black, output white. Okay. Over there. Now, every change I've been making here in the levels has been happening to all of the color channels. You can use the levels to manipulate individual color channels. So if I go and I say red, it just has red there. And now if I drag this down, essentially it's brightening, it's doing the same thing, but instead of brightening all the channels, it's just brightening the red, which means that our image is becoming more and more red until, if I smush it the whole way down on the red channel, we get that. The image is very, very red. If I take the left-hand side of it, we start essentially just subtracting all of the red out of the image until we're just left with green and blue. And if I were to grab the middle, you can see that I can sort of shift the red content up and down in the brightness spectrum. Same thing if I go to green, right? And so now if I shift this down, I'm brightening all the green, right? Until the image just blows out to 100% green. Same thing from the other direction. I'm removing all of the green, left with just red and blue, and same thing. So this one brightens the blue until we're all blue, and then this one removes all the blue out of the image. You can see that happen very clearly down here. You'll see that all the blue pixels sort of drop out of this graph down to the bottom, where they are completely smushed to 0%. Meaning that now we just have what do we subtract blue? So we just have red and green here. Cool. Now, so see when we're doing this, we're sort of smushing the input for each of the channels. Let's go back to RGB. The alpha won't do anything in this instance because, like we discussed before, this is a JPEG and it doesn't have an alpha channel. If we go to these bottom ones here, the output and the output, this is what's actually being displayed on screen. How bright can the brightest part of the image be? And so if I start to dial this down, watch the graph and watch the image. Essentially, the brightest part is the relationship here of each individual channel is maintained, but now it's being expressed over a much smaller range, right? Which means like the entire image has just been dramatically darkened by taking the output white and moving it in that direction. If I were to take the output black and start to move it up, you see that now none of the darkness is there. We're essentially removing that from the image. So if I bring these in, we start to get this sort of very low contrast sort of look to the image, where it's, the darkest darks are not very dark, and the brightest brights are not very bright. Everything is existing in this band around the middle now in the scope. Cool. And the other nice thing about the scope is that it is showing us everything that's happening. And so it can be interesting to bring in other things that you're going to composite, for instance, like this plant. And so watch the scope when I drop this other thing in the image. Why did something totally turn off there? Something weird with this PNG. I accidentally had the alpha matte thing still on. There we go. Let me do that one more time. Watch the scope this time as I drag in that plant. Let's go to fit. There we go. Right, and so now you can see, oh yeah, this is where the plant is, right? That was not there before. If I move the plant, you can see how this affects, right? If I move it up and down, it's not really changing its location there, right? Because this is sort of a left to right analysis of the pixels. Cool. Is there anything else I want to say about this right now? No, not exactly. So that's fine. Leave it there, that, and if we change this to red, you see red there. let's make this fit, kind of like so. And so now we got a better understanding of what's going on with the color and the scopes here, and the idea of analyzing the color numerically throughout the entire image. And we have the scope here to sort of give us this graph of it. Let's start with this one here, and we're going to, let's call this ancient. And I'm going to grab, what am I going to grab here? Let's get the Rubik's Cube and just do some tests with this. So the Rubik's Cube is not this is super high contrast, and you can tell that like there's very little gradation here. It's, it's very saturated, right? And we can see that when I drag this in, and look what happened to the scope over there, right? Here it is, without, with, without, with, right? We get a massive change in what's going on there. If we come in here and move this down, like so. What do we need to do, right? We've done some compositing here, in that, this image is now over top of this image, but we haven't really done any work in order to make these images look like they go together, right? And so this is, probably the most basic part of compositing, color matching, right? And usually this means that we're taking something that's in the foreground, that is ideally, a wider color gamut, and we're compositing it with the background, and we can, decrease the values to sort of match what's going on there, channel by channel. And I think it's useful to do this channel by channel. And so I'm going to grab the Rubik's Cube, and I'm going to throw a levels on the Rubik's Cube. Okay, and so yeah, I'm on the Rubik's Cube here, and this is the levels for the Rubik's Cube. And I am going to use my input and output values here on the levels to try and make this work in this part of the image here. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing is that essentially the process here is going to be, we're going to go channel by channel, and we're going to make the red match, and then the green match, and then the blue match. And if we do a reasonable job of that, when we turn all the channels back on, we'll have something that sort of sits in the image better. Now, it's not going to be magic. It's not going to make it look like it was there. There's other issues here, right? For instance, it's not going to make this like cast a shadow, right? But we just wanted to sit into the same color space as the image, right? We've all experienced this when we see quote unquote bad CG in a movie, right? This is what makes bad CG look like bad CG, or one of the things, is that the color space that the computer graphics were rendered in is not at all representative of the color space that's in the footage that's being composited. So we'll go to red here, so we just see the brightness of the red, and then come over here to red, right? And now I can start to make adjustments over here so that this starts to look like what we have there, right? So on the graph there, for instance, the red values, which were super bright red, and we can see them here, they're like way up here, whereas the red values for the image are more in this range there. And so I'm going to take the output and bring this down into like that zone. You can already see that this is starting to stand out less in this view. And I'll take these bottom one and move these up so that this looks like the dark red values are about where the dark red values are. Now we can make a similar change. We'll go to green, and we'll go to green. And now, same deal, we've got a bunch of super bright red, green values that don't at all represent what's going on there. And so the green I can bring down, like so. And then, how about the green values down here? Maybe up to that band, kind of where some of the green values are. And then, to complete it, go to the blue, right? And go to the blue. And now, once again, we've got these really out of bounds blue values. I'm bringing that down into the appropriate range and bringing, see that these are way down there, bringing them back up to where I see, you know, some kind of band of blue here, right? That's where our blue minimum is. And so now if I go back to RGB and I go back to RGB, much better, right? So before, after, before, after, right? See how it sits, like we haven't fooled anyone yet, right? There's a bunch of other techniques to leverage here, but now it at least looks like it's in the same color universe, right? Like this is not, right now it's just slapping, you know, the name for a bad comp is just slapping A on B, right? And so when you're compositing things, they refer to this as like A over B. And that now all of a sudden sits in the color space much better. And so now that everything is there, I might grab the input just for all the channels together to tweak it just a little bit. Most of the work was done in those color channels. You can see that some of these are still kind of maybe not lining up with the bands that are in the image. And so I'm going to go ahead and try to adjust maybe a little bit of the gamma channel per channel. And so we'll go to the red, and so now this one here, you can see as I move this up and down, it's moved the red to areas of the scope that look more red there. I can go to green, green, oh, I picked the wrong one, green, there we go. And I'm just adjusting the gamma in each of these. Ah, I keep missing here. Blue. There we go. Go back to the RGB. Better yet, I would say an incremental change. So that's nothing. That's with some more color matching here, right? So we've done a lot to sort of get this into the correct zone there. Let's do it again on a different project. We'll make another new comp. We'll call this one Forest. or we'll call this street. There we go. And on street, I'll bring in, I've got some sort of street here. Cool. All right, we see how different the histogram looks, or the scope rather, for this image. And again, we'll bring in the Rubik's Cube and make it some sort of reasonable size. The perspective of the object here obviously matters quite a bit, but again, we're not trying to deal with the space, the spatial layout of the object, but rather the color space. And so let's do it again in this instance. So in this case, we do have these really bright red spots here, but those are the lights. I'm not sure we want any of this to look like the lights. And so again, we're going to do the same process. The levels goes on the Rubik's Cube, not the background. And let's go channel by channel. And so we got the red here and the red here. And now we could bring this down. Excuse me. To where that should be. Right about there. We'll go to green, green, and we'll go to blue, blue, and let's see how that looks. Cool. Right, now, I didn't adjust the red channels so that the red values for our Rubik's Cube are up here, right? Because what are these things up here? These are these super bright lights, right? We don't want to, this is not lit up. We want it to seem more along the light that's in the red of this area around here, right? And so now, you have this red here, we have it like 40%, 20%, 11%, and we can have similar values in the red of the image there. If we were to, something to make this look as if it were behind some other object, you could put and we have a very hard edge there. We can blend some of that. We're going to feather slightly. right? So it sits into the color space of the image, right? So we got this one, this one, very different. Let's do the forest. Composition, forest, and I'll bring in forest image. Again, these are huge resolution-wise, so I don't want to scale them down so much that I get bars on the sides, and I'm just sort of moving it to find the interesting part of it. And again, the Rubik's Cube. And scale it down a little bit. Cool. Now, especially compared to the last image, right? Which one has more color variation and contrast? This one, right? Compared to the last one. The last one was very dreary, and so there may be less of an adjustment to be made here, right? We can clearly see the Rubik's Cube is way out of bounds from where the rest of the image is, but we'll go through the process again. Again, Rubik's Cube gets the levels. There we go. And we'll go channel by channel. Red. Red. And probably not much to be made at the top end, but we do want to move this up so it's not the whole way down here. And then green, green, and blue, blue. And clearly, right, this needs to come up to live in this band with the other blue. Cool. Back to RGB. Without, with, without, with, right? So this was the most high contrast image we worked with, and so it's not a huge change, but all of a sudden now it makes it seem like it's being hit by the light that's at least in this scene, right? Even if it doesn't necessarily seem like it's completely working in the entire, it's at least it's in the same space, color space, as that is. Cool. And if we did the same thing here, I need to add a point. There we go. V. And again, just get that little bit of softness on the edge. Right, so now it's like conceivable that it's in the same space. There's some other things to take care of here, but we've got, I'm going to save this project. Okay, so this is a really good exercise because we have this very saturated, high contrast foreground object that we can easily crunch to, match our background, which is notably less so. Let's try something else here. I'm going to make another one here, composition, new composition. We'll call this blimp. And we'll bring in, this one. And we'll scale this down. Cool. All right, this one you can see drastically different setup. Great, and there should be a blimp over here. There we go. Why does this have a line around it? Should be a PNG. Let's look at the blimp by itself. Interesting. We can use something here. So in this case, for whatever reason, it's not totally see-through on the alpha channel there. I'm going to come into an effect that we can use sometimes on the blimp, and I'm going to go to what's referred to as extract. And I'm going to put the, not the extractor, extract on the blimp. And you can choose a channel here. Let's go to the alpha channel. There we go. And so now if we were to grab the white point and bring it, or the black point and bring it up. There we go. You see that for whatever reason the alpha channel in this image is not 100% black over there. But if we grab the black point and bring it up on the extractor, it knocks that out totally because there's that there. And so now, if we come back, there we go. Now this is cleaner there. And we have our blimp. And so let's go ahead and we're going to put multiple blimps into this image. I don't want to move the background while I'm messing around, so I'm just going to hit lock on the background. We'll grab the blimp and move it over here. And yeah, we can see that the blimp, again, super saturated compared to this pretty dingy, grungy background here. So, same formula, blimp, and then levels. And the levels is after the extractor. We'll go to red and red. Cool. And so now you can see where the red is in this blimp. If it's the whole way up there, there's a lot of stuff in the blimp that's way above where the other things are in the image. I'm going to bring that all down. And there's the stuff on the bottom side. Probably bring that not too far up. Yeah, I'm sort of looking over here, you know, but I can't decipher every piece of content based on the scope. And so I'm also looking at the black and white image. When does it look like it sits in the space? Right? You're trying to match. And so here, there we go. And let's go to green and green over here. And same deal, got to get that stuff out of that green territory, at least down into maybe that territory. And then here. Right about there. And then blue. And blue. There we go. Cool. Now let's see what they look like all together. RGB. Not bad, right? So here we go. Without, or that's the extractor. Without, with. Much better. Yeah? Without, with. Now, like I said, it's a combination of this, which I find very helpful in terms of like, how much, right? But I'm still using my eyes, and the location in the image matters, right? I was trying to make it fit the surrounding image in this area. So for instance, if we make another blimp, Control C, Control V, I'm going to go ahead and return, call this distant blimp. Now, distant blimp is going to go back here, maybe over here, and scale it down so it does look like it's in the distance there, right? And this already has the existing color correction, but the existing color correction doesn't work at all in the distance, right? Because why? The darkest darks and the whitest whites are very similar. Like it's pretty much just gray soup back here, right? And so we got to come in and do the changes on distant blimp and make sure I have distant blimp, yeah, red, there we go. And so now, there, and this is definitely going to come up, right? So I'm trying to make it look like it sits in that part of the image. And same thing, green, green, and bringing this up like that. There we go. And blue, blue. There we go. And now let's go back to RGB. Looks a little too red, but we're in the right vicinity. Nice. right? And so now we've got a distant blimp back there, right? Distant blimp, you know, could be duplicated, maybe scaled down more, way back there. All right, so we've got something that works for like sort of foreground blimp, distant blimp, distant blimp. One of the other things that happens in the distance is things get less clear, right? And so we distant blimp here, just go ahead and add a GAUS Gaussian blur to this one. And usually this is subtle, maybe like 3 pixels or so. Let's look at 5 pixels. There we go. So without, with, and even the foreground blip, right, probably could benefit from maybe a few pixels of blur. Let's say 2. Right, that's none. It's sort of unnaturally sharp. Just giving it a little bit there. It's quite a bit. Making sense how this is working here? Color matching? Angel, you following along there? Cool, so we got our different blimps here. That's a pretty good one. There's another one I wanted to do. Composition. New composition. I'll call this fog. And I had, here we go. Cool. All right. Interesting scope. We got a bench, blimp. What else do we have? This plant, another plant, a Rubik's Cube. Right, now this is interesting that it came in with this shadow, right? And so this is probably rendered in CG, but rendered with the shadow, right? So something like this gives us that to comp in there. Cool. And if we look at this, you know, we can see it really sticking out here on the histogram as we move this around. And so let's do the same thing. We're going to take this bench and go to our levels and do our thing. So red, red, green, green, and blue, blue. Let's see. This is kind of an extreme match, so let's see how we're doing with this. Better, right? So here it is without, with, without, with, right? Now we're starting released in the same kind of light here from the RGB. Cool. That works pretty well. Maybe a little more believable if like scale does a big part of like making it, like if you do this, you know, it's like, okay, that doesn't, you know, like, because the scale also kind of destroys the effect. And again, these people are in focus, so most of the time the things coming in look too sharp. And so just that little bit of blur on them helps quite a bit. If we look at this bench over here, isn't super crisp. So a little bit of blur there helps with that. And let's go ahead and see if we could grab the blimp. And I'll put it in there. We gotta do that same trick with the extract. And bring up the black point. Nope. On the blimp. On the alpha. There we go. Bring that up. Good we go. So now we've got the blimp. Maybe we scale it up just slightly. I don't know. It's not where you want to be flying a blimp, but you get the idea. So let's try a different one here. This works to cut this out. Another technique here that sometimes I use in conjunction or by itself is that on the blimp I'm going to go ahead and throw the tint, and I'm going to color correction tint on the blimp, and tint takes the black and remaps it and the white that remaps it. And so here I'm going to need to remap this, and so I'm going to color pick the black and pick where is black in this part of the image, where the blimp is, right? The blimp is far in the background, right? And so what is black back here? Probably like, you know, like maybe this, right? And then what is white? White is going to be, you know, maybe there, right? And so that does a lot to now making the blimp look like it's in that area. And then the tint has a value here that you can, you know, sort of mix it in depending on how much you would want. And so you can see over there on the scope what it's doing, how it smushed all the values into this range right here, which really works in that. And then again, the things back here are also pretty soft. And so again, Gaussian blur and dial that up a little bit. And now that's back there. Let's try a more extreme match. We'll also put the Rubik's Cube back there. All right, and so we can use the same thing to sort of get it in the zone. Again, tint. And the darkest part of this area, maybe there. And then the whitest part of this area, there. There we go. Right, and so that immediately makes it sit in that part of the image. And again, it's back. So I'll go Gaussian blur. on the cube. There we go. And now, some weird stuff going on in New York, but these people are still pretty happy about it. Right, so massively different adjustments for something in the foreground versus something in the background there. We'll put this other plant right here. Cool. So we'll do the same thing. Levels. Right, the tint works back here because, especially in this image, there's not a lot of color content back there, right? It's very gray. But here in the foreground, you know, her sweater is, you know, maxing out over here. So it's, you know, much more saturated in the foreground. And this plant is going to be kind of in between. And so let's put the levels on the plant and make some adjustments here. And green, green. Now here, I'm trying to make this look like it's in the same space as the people, not necessarily the background. Blue, and blue. A little too red. And let's maybe throw the tint on top of it. So what's the whitest part here? Kind of there. What's the darkest part? Maybe like these pants. There. It's a little much, but now you can sort of dial it in. To make that work. Right, so now cool. Let's go ahead and save. Even here, you know, this is super crisp. Helps a little. Cool. Let's make one more. This is canal. Cool. All right, so we got this canal. Let's do something with this. We'll bring in the cube. Scale. And yeah, we'll put it like maybe right about there. And let's do our thing. And green. Oh, I'm still looking at red. That's why it's not changing. There, green. And blue. Blue. And just the general brightness. Cool. Again, that part of the image, especially when we get back this far, things are a little blurred. So let's add a little Gaussian blur on the cube. So that softens that up a little bit. Cool. Now, I'm going to take the cube and save. I'm going to duplicate the cube. Cool. And the duplicate cube, I'm going to make 3D so that I can bring it down and flip it this way. And perhaps if I grab the square here, I might be able to stretch it. And there we go. Cool. So again, I made a 3D layer, and then I'm just, flipped it and tried to line it up as best I could in the image. That gets us partway there. I feel like the dark part of it is not quite as dark here, so this is, let's call this reflection. There we go. And let's tint the reflection. There we go. And so the darkest part is maybe here, and then the brightest part is maybe here, and then just dial that in maybe a little bit. Cool. Okay, we're partway there, but we need, it's not, all the reflections are reflections in the water, and they're ripply, right? How do we make something kind of ripply before? Yes. Okay. The displace moves the pixels based on the turbulent part, which is noise. There is a similar effect that we can use here that's just called displacement map, where instead of using a noise to displace something, we can use another image to displace something. So, I don't think it's going to work if we throw it on here. Let's try it. So I have the reflection, and I'll throw it at the end of the chain here. This is an effect, like I said, instead of using noise, it asks, there's a bunch of effects like this in After Effects that reference another layer. And so we need to tell which layer do we want to use to distort stuff. And we want to use this one. I'm going to go ahead and label this layer correctly. This is the canal. There we go. And so now if we come back to reflection and we select canal, there we go. Now if this is how much is being displaced based on the underlying image. And so instead of just random noise that we get from the turbulent displace, here the noise is being generated from the wobbly part of this image, right? And so this allows us to spread that out. Let's see, does this look better if I make it slightly transparent? Maybe just a little bit. I guess those would be together a little bit in the water, but here, right now we've done a bit to make this work. I feel like the 3D-ness of it is still not quite right. That's better. Cool. So here's my stack for the reflection. Levels, Gaussian blur, tint, displacement map. The important part for the displacement map are the which layer is it referencing? It needs to be referencing the canal layer. And actually, let's try displacing it based on luminance, not a color channel. I think that looks a little better. Right, and so that gives us that wobbly effect there, which we could sort of, if you dial it too far, it just sort of obliterates it. But just a little bit starts to tear it apart. In a way that works in the reflection. Cool. I like the tint on the reflection. I may copy that and put it on this stack as well. I like it. Cool. All right, I feel good about that. That's good. So, a lot of practice doing some compositing, right? Getting this, all sorts of other tricks for shadows and CG and lighting and all these sort of things. But when it comes down to it, a lot of it is getting this right so that the renders and the things that we composite in actually sit in the color space of said image to make this look correct. And so I'm going to have you guys put together like another, movie out of these scenes. And what did we do? We did 5 scenes here. We did 6. And so we've got no school on Monday, right? So no lecture. Don't come to campus on Monday. And so we'll have the revisions on your graphics package and this project due a week from today, Wednesday. Sound good? All right. Let's call it.